Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Welcome to Atomo. It is Thursday, January 12th, 2023. For this one, I wanted to kind of play a bit of a, call it a theoretical game, for instance. No medical advice this one, no legal advice here, no financial advice as usual. I just wanted to run some ideas. So this is just idea craft, theoretical. First, let's kick us off with, just give me a second here. Let me turn that on. All right, let's jump into, I'm seeing a lot of these news reports with the, suddenly died. So I just decided to do a Google search and take a look at suddenly died. And it's either there's something going on that we need to have further conversation on, but also wanted to put some counterpoint here. Let's see what happens if I just hit a refresh on here. Am I up to date? Just some things from a day ago. Uh, so some of the statistics I was looking at, I think I saw that there's around maybe 30,000 deaths a year of youth 18 and under in the United States. I think related to cardiovascular problems. Now, I don't know the full range. It's just a high level open piece of data. But now that this topic is gaining a lot of attention, it's quite possible that, and it's again, I don't know. I don't know whether just the statistic with now the antenna are up and people are looking for this, that when any youth suddenly dies, that's going to come up and become a thing. But you even see things like this gentleman, Hunter Brown, Air Force Academy, again, just walking to class and then, yeah, don't know how to explain it, just to shine a light on it and wondering the irony of it all is, back during the lockdown time, we had to show our medical credentials. And now when you have people passing away in this sort of, calling it suddenly dies or sudden adult death syndrome or whatever you want to call it, we don't get any further medical information about it. So it's just the clown world of it all is quite spectacular. I don't know how else to articulate this. But what I wanted to jump into on the theory craft here is I was looking through some of the Gates notes about the Germ team. And if you're a board gamer, you probably know the board game called Pandemic, where you have something like this Germ team. Is think of it like a SWAT team or special forces team that can deal with important outbreaks and potentially get into an area and contain it before it uh, gets too far out into I guess, into the world at large. And in the board game Pandemic, that's what you're doing. You're running with a team and determining how best to contain the outbreak before it took over. And so it feels a little bit similar to that. Now I get that there's some good stuff here. There's some good ideas here, but you have to kind of take it for, the light side and the dark side of it. And just with the way that governments have been playing this and the way that it seems that there's nefarious ways to make money off of this that I don't quite agree with. And that's kind of what I wanted to put forward is to take a look at this, find a vector in which this can be very harmful, even though the altruism of it is good, but that there's something behind the scenes that could potentially be worked on that really doesn't in the end help us. So let's take a look at this. Um, so here's a point. These are fully paid experts to mount a coordinated response to any dangerous outbreak. Okay, cool. Somebody's going to have to pay for that. Would Gates himself pay with this out of his own pocket? Well, there's a money-making edge example to it. I kind of like this, where Germ team has a diverse workforce. Team's going to serve the entire world. I can see diversity from a point where if you're going into different countries, you need to know the customs, you need to be able to make connections, speak the language. Um, but even since then, I would want to make sure that I have the best people possible on this team, and you can always connect them up with particular connections within the countries, or even have whoever is the best of the best. You have them flying around, but within each countries, you have potentially their type of germ that actually works in each of the countries, and how to fund this, I don't quite have. Uh, as I think this through, getting it funded by the actual drug companies would not work out. It's a bit of what I was thinking about is, if that were to be the case, then I kind of look at it. I work more in technology, and when you have things like, well, team, the worst one is lines of code. So if you incentivize your team versus the number of lines of code that they develop, well, they're going to write sloppy programs that are quite quite long. Um, or if they are to, hey, you caught escape defects, excellent, good for you. Well, how about I write more escape defects if that's what you're gonna praise, instead of just valuable working software that comes out of the gate, which is kind of with this is um, that's one of the recommendations. So one recommendation is that um, that we have a log of all of these. We have these biolabs, these level 1, 2, 3, 4 biolabs. If we have work being done in a level 4 secure biolab, that all of those strains are documented and should be made transparent in some ledger on whatever the controlling bodies are, governmental bodies, or there's that's just make that a legislation. And if that is not done, then there has to be sanctions against the lab. That research would have to be destroyed. So the first part of it is, if this thing leaks out, then is my germ response team actually beating down stuff that actually got out of the barn? And so that's one of the things that we want to look at. So talking about getting things out of the barn, there's talk about. Now, I went to the fact check because I just wanted to do some double checking on. There's some articles about a while out, maybe a year or two ago. It says this is 2022, late 2022. I think the work was done earlier than that, maybe late 2021. Yeah. Um, so what Boston University is doing, they're making chimeric type version of SARS-CoV-2, and they're actually taking the spike protein, and spike protein is that thing that pops out. You ever see the image of the coronavirus that has all these little spiky things, nodules coming out of it. And that's the way it connects to the receptors in the human body. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I can definitely read enough of this stuff to understand how it works. Um, then once that connection's made, the material that it has will pump it into the cell and rewire the way that the cell works to make more. SARS-CoV-2. There's a good Kirkusat video on that breaks it down and explains it. So some people are saying, oh, it's going to kill 80% of the people that infects. Well, that is wrong. It's not tested on people. It is tested on mice. What the now they're saying with the particular mouse that they were using, this particular strain they were saying, so they had three of them: the Omicron, the ancestral virus, which I believe is the precursor to the Omicron before it mutated, and then you have this thing called the Omni S hybrid, which is the chimeric SARS-CoV-2 virus that they were building. So now that the spike protein we understand connects to the ACE2 receptors within the human body, and it's very effective at doing that, especially the Omicron is very effective at that. How about we play with that? And then in the genetic material of the virus, then we can play with that mixture and see what we can do with it. So even though it infected mice, the one thing, and Dr. John Campbell has a good video about this where he went through the paper. He's on YouTube. You can do Dr. John Campbell research, look that up, where he talks about this chimeric virus. But one of the things they do with the mice is you can actually genetically modify the mice to have human ACE2 style receptors in it. So these are humanized mice. So 100% of the mice infected with the ancestral virus strain died. So that could be with the humanization that occurs with the mouse, while 80% of those infected with the Omni-S died. Oh, okay, look, well, the Omni-S is not as strong as the ancestral variant. Don't worry about anything. The point is they're still playing with this, and this goes back to my earlier point that, well, am I going to be funding research like this and then funding a team here to go and combat this stuff when this stuff breaks out of the barn, and then they have to go beat it down? Well, and on the taxpayer dime. This is kind of cool if I get to be somewhat of a director in charge of providing funding allocation to these with any sort of appropriate kickbacks. That's another thing that we need to open up and take a look at, is how these directors of our infectious disease agencies and our pharmaceutical, like the FDA or Health Canada, how they're potentially being incentivized so that we don't get some sort of virtuous loop of money flowing around in a circle that's enriching a group of people. Because that's, once you find a business value or business, I work with a lot of companies on building business value, and you can easily see once you start working this out, say, well, we can do this and then we can do that. And if there's like a common entity between them that gets paid on both sides. Again, this is theory crafting here, but it's possible to build some of these businesses. And feels kind of dirty to say this, a business of potentially harming people, but making money off of it. So, well, who else can we put into play? Well, we can put the World Health Organization into play. And why do we put them into play? Well, they're working on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response accords. Now, if the response of this says that thou shalt have something like this, a GERM team, and this is still the accord that they're working on. So yeah, WHO member states is working on this. The United Nations is in here. Other non-state actors, so which means companies, organizations, that are working on to build this. And again, you don't know with these medical, public policy, and all that how they are incentivized. So the next piece that comes out of this, so there's this piece of developing an accord, and I was reading through this, is the accord, how much authority could an accord have over signatory countries? Will it be legally binding? Will it take sovereignty away from signatory countries? Well, I think down here, you talk about the importance of national sovereign rights and respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. Interesting. We had a big protest in Canada in February 2022 about some of the freedoms that get trampled in the medical autocracy. And if you know no jippy jab, no job. So there's that sort of stuff comes in. Of course, they're going to say, well, we can't influence. The country wants to impose that, country imposes that, but we're not going to say it. Well, WHO was saying things during the pandemic, and it didn't seem that they had there's some flip flopping on that. Is a mask good? No, you can't. No, except a cloth mask is not good, but the surgical mask is okay. It has the triple layer in it or whatnot. So, expected that such an accord would aim to help prevent future disease outbreaks from impinging on people's freedom to travel, work, seek education, and above all, lead a healthy life free of avoidable disease, as called for by another global accord, the WHO Constitution. So I then looked at this a little bit further. WHO member states agreed to develop zero draft of legally binding pandemic accord in early 2023. Let me see, legally binding. What in this one, would it be legally binding? And this was 25 November and 7 December. Same as 2022. This one, just double check. 2022. And then 7 December 2022. Now they're talking about, okay, well, what might a legally binding? And it's just the wording on this first draft of a legally binding agreement designed to protect the world from future pandemics. It's zero draft of the pandemic record accord rooted in the WHO Constitution will be discussed by member states in February 2023. What I suspect also is you might not have China and Russia as member states in this. I don't. They might have pulled out of this. And so, of course, you're going to have the collective West jumping into this in with both feet. So that now, well, so that sets us up is that if there is some sort of legally binding accord that stipulates what the member states must do in the case of a pandemic, then we got some potential team here. We got groups building viruses. We got possibly legally binding documents that lock us into a pattern of response. And then, well, how might we deploy? Now, if you want to create a business model out of this, and how might we deploy an event in order for us to start ramping up the little virtuous engine? So I found this article here, and the idea with this one is that in Israel they were trying certain things with other medicines, and what they found was, okay, you had these years where when they're trying some of these vectors and some of these tests, it's like in this case, well, how about I'm paraphrasing the article. I'll put it into the details, but I don't want to say too much because of, algorithms don't tend to like this stuff. That if we're doing this thing in putting, stuff inside of the kids, then what happened here is I believe it created an outbreak in this specific story. They talked about how there was in the child itself, the child contracted the disease and suffered from it. And so we don't know what happens when we put, let's take a look here. If I go up here, yeah, this here. So we don't know that when we ingest this, how the gut biome operates with it. And of course, if you go poo poo, then now with this going into the gut biome, poo poo it out, or comes in contact, just say you're changing a dirty diaper or something, and you touch it and you don't wash your hands well enough, and then maybe you touch your face, next thing you know it, you've ingested it, and then so on and so forth, then you potentially have a vector to which you can take something like this. I'm not saying that this one specifically would be part of the vector, but it's telling us here that, well, we do have a country that's actually playing with delivery, that we just need to connect to another country that's playing with the development of the product. And then, well, then your last piece is when this group gets involved here, that there potentially will be medicines, because if this group is developing the product, this group might develop a potential antidote vector for the product that this group will understand and have at the ready. That's been deployed through this particular way of deploying it. And then you, the taxpayer, are going to get to pay for all of this. You paid for the funding, you paid for the response team, you paid for the testing and deployment of these particular drugs. Then the drug company is going to produce the vaccine to which you're going to deploy, and which you're going to have to pay for. And it's a great virtuous circle. So maybe 2025 might see a resurgence. I don't feel like blackpilling when this is the miracle channel. So what can we do to prevent the miracle? And well, prevent the miracle. Getting a little wires crossed in myself. So one of the things that we should look at is legislation that has us put out on the record, if we have a level 4 biomed facility that's working on this stuff, then that stuff should go into the record. It shames me to say that they're also looking at weaponized vectors that they might put under security clearances, because it has military uses, and that then requires, special task force and other entities within the government to really clamp down on that and provide, what's the sort of check and balance that we know about this stuff. So legislation to actually put that into the space, legislation that basically, I want to get it transparent, first of all. What we also need to know the reason why we're doing this. So it really has to have a very strong case as why are we playing with this stuff when we know that if we're building chimeric viruses that won't have an evolutionary path, because one of the arguments I heard is, well, we need to know a bit more about it, because if it developed really in the wild, then we know how to fight this thing. But I've listened to enough over the years of the pandemic of evolutionary biologists saying that, there's a stage that this goes through of infection. If it were to move from a bat to a human, that there's a particular evolutionary transit that it makes. and you can actually see that, especially if you're going out and collecting the coronaviruses from the bats, then you can actually see how the thing is evolving, and you would see how it would make the jump, because what we don't know is how did the ACE2 kind of receptor spike protein emerge, because it's designed remarkably well for connection with humans, but we don't know. For instance, I don't know because I don't do the research, but it would be the question I have is, well, did the bats have those particular ACE2 receptors? They are reservoiring the coronaviruses, but they're not getting infected, or looks to be they're not dying. The bats are not dying from the coronavirus. Bats are mammals as well. So it's like, how many of these things you have to put together before we see that, okay, well, it can be very dangerous to humans. So a lot of conjecture there. So just looking at, okay, what are the particular recommendations that we have to make in order for these particular dangerous viruses that are being chimericized, or built, to get those made known. Especially, we need to open up, okay, what gain of function research is going on right now in the gain of function prior to Fauci and the gain of function after Fauci, because it did play with the wording on what gain of function means. So in order to prevent a pandemic, it's like the first step is just not having the dangerous stuff in the first place. So open to any comments on this. So those are some of my thoughts, and that's a way that potentially, with all the pieces that I put together, that you could create basically a way to make money off of doing this. Well, it's just a nasty, nasty thought of then creating harm to a lot of people. And I don't want to get into all the conspiracy stuff about depopulation and whatnot. But at this point, I don't want to be completely black-pilled here. It's looking at, how do you trust when there's so much going on that we should know, but we don't. But because of this happening, I just want to bring this up for additional conversation. And hopefully this sparks maybe something in somebody else that could lead to something positive happening here, so that we don't have one of these nasty pandemics with stuff that we've grown in our Franken labs. Okay. Have a good evening, and thank you again for your attention. Good night.